and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. The very word unlock gives rise to optimism and hope, and we saw it all day today, including in the markets. Though some of that optimism has truly been marred by development later this evening, where Moody's has downgraded India's rating. They've downgraded India from Baa2 to Baa3 with a negative outlook. What perhaps pricks even more and what policymakers should truly look at very carefully is when Moody's says, while today's action is taken in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, it was not driven by the impact of the pandemic. Rather, the pandemic amplifies vulnerabilities in India's credit profile that were present and building prior to the shock, and which motivated the assignment of a negative outlook last year. So net, Moody has downgraded India's rating, saying that there were problems which persisted from even earlier. We saw a glimpse of that in the quarterly GDP numbers as well. But what do we need to do now? Let's shift our focus there as we speak on the first day of Unlock 1.0. Regular viewers of this show would be knowing how we've tracked and taken you through all the phases of the lockdown, and this is the first phase of the unlock. So now how do we do that? How do we do that when states with the ball firmly in their court is being very wary, very careful and opening up much slower? What does it mean for businesses that there are different rules in different states all the time and they are ever changing? Where is the demand going to come in? Speaking to me today on some of those very key issues is Anurag Katriar. He is the president of the National Restaurant Association of India. I'm also joined today by Kumar, Rajagopalan, CEO of the Retailers Association of India. Two sectors which have managed to open their doors now in this first phase of Unlock 1.0. I'm also speaking today with R. Gopalan, former Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs. Welcome to all of you. Let me start by speaking with you, Mr. Rajagopalan, just to get a sense of how retailers, and this is a very important part of the economy, how retailers are planning to open their doors and what are the challenges you face at this point?
I think thank you for calling me here. The important part is that this is now unlock. I think all this time we've been accustomed to this word called lockdown, and it feels nice to be in a position wherein we are talking about unlock. I think that's the first big welcome change there. The second part of it is that I think retailers have been sitting thinking that they'll have to open up. I mean, there's so much of expenses that's got incurred during the time when the whole thing was locked down. The economic cycle has to restart. We all have been talking about how to really kickstart this economic cycle. And unless retail starts, the rest of the industry would not be able to really produce anything because there's no consumption. So the consumption engine in this country is really primed by retail industry. And so it's an important part that the government has now taken up as part of their unlock thought process. And I think we need to understand it in spirit, because the minute we go into various clauses there, sometimes there are issues that's there. So firstly, I'd like to thank the government for coming out with an unlock version. I'd like to thank the fact that the spirit is to open up the economy again and to kickstart the economy again. There are some issues. There are some red herrings that we need to be very careful about. For example, the central version, the main version of MHA is talking about not more than 5 customers in a store. Now, that works if it's a very small store, but we all know the store comes in all kinds of sizes. When there is a store which is about 20,000 square feet, 5 customers is insignificant. So this is something that we have had a talk with, and I'm sure that the government will come back with some clarification on that. However, we also know that along with this notification of the center, every state is supposed to...
There's also, yeah, exactly. Yes, that's the point I was actually coming in with, because it's not just central guidelines, it's state guidelines as well, which differ from state to state. In some states you can't have a trial room and you can't take returns of clothes, etc. In some states you can work only on alternate days on either side of the road. Various states have their own rules and regulations. Do you see this as a hindrance, or do you think it would have helped if there was more uniformity?
Oh, it is a hindrance, and it kind of gets people into relooking and rejigging the way in which they have to operationalize everything that they do. For example, you spoke about this odd even, right? We thought that Delhi had done this and it was driving us crazy. We had appealed to the chief minister in Delhi. We had met up with the chief minister, spoken about removing that, and all of a sudden, Maharashtra seems to have adopted that. So, just when we thought Delhi solved the problem, Maharashtra seems to have adopted it. Now, it looks very simple from the outside. But the minute you say that this is the day when a store is open, this is the day when it's not open, it's the most confusing for customers. Footfalls just crash. And it's not as if demand in this point of time is elastic. It is actually inelastic demand. People only come out and buy those items that they really need. A, they do not have enough money, and B, they are very wary of coming out and
I think you've hit the nail on the head. You've hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah, I think you
Maharashtra.
hit the nail on the head when you talked about demand. And here, let me bring in Mr. Anurag Katriar. Yeah, I'll come back to you, sir. I'll come back to you, sir. Let's just go across the panel. Let me go to Mr. Anurag Katriar on the issue of demand. Now, restaurants ready to open their doors, depending on which state you operate in, of course, from the June of 8th. And we've also put out some details on what restaurants are planning to do, working on various proposals, SOPs, waiting for proposals from the government. But do you honestly believe people at this stage are going to want to go out and sit in a restaurant? Do you see that happening, Mr. Katriar?
To be brutally honest to you, no, I don't see that happening. It's not a very necessity kind of a service. People are very right now. However, having said that, I believe there will also be a pent-up demand. People who have been staying home for over 2 months, eating home-cooked food, some of them may like to step up. But will there be volume consumption? I totally doubt it. It won't be. And also, you must remember that now with all the restrictions that we are talking about, I don't even know how many people can I take into my restaurant, how many tables do I need to reduce, and so on and so forth. But there'll be lots of things that will happen. So at this stage, I think the way I look at it is, it's a good baby step, a positive baby step that you are segregating containment and non-containment zones for kickstarting the economy. And I think as far as F&B is concerned, with the restricted timings and in absence of guidelines and SOPs from various states, it may be a little premature to rejoice and really know how will it play out. We are waiting for those guidelines to come from various governments in different states. Like, for example, large cities like Mumbai and Delhi or Gurgaon, they are not even opening up. So it's tough to say, but all I can say is, okay, there is some movement at least, from nothing to something.
So all of this time, Mr. Katriar, delivery services were allowed. And pickup services were allowed for parceled food. Did that help the industry at all? What were the kind of volumes that you've seen there?
So realistically speaking, the delivery volume has not been in more than 30% of the pre-COVID delivery volumes overall as an industry. So it doesn't really help, considering that a proportion of fixed operating expense in our business is fairly high. This is actually turned out to be counterproductive, but at least, it brings in some little bit of cash flow into the system of certain restaurants. But no, consumption has been very muted. And in most cases, it has been under 30%, more hovering around in its 20s.
Which brings me to the demand question. Gopalan, some people seeing this may say, and the counter view is that, the lockdown in that sense has been good for people's habits. More and more are eating ghar ka khana, not shopping unnecessarily or not buying what they don't need. So, closing down their consumption. But that's not a good thing for the economy, is it? And how important do you think is it to revive demand as we start unlocking? A lot of supply side measures we've seen from the government. But what about on the side of reviving demand?
Well, the demand was bad even in the last week of, if you look at the figures of 31st March, the trade, hotels and transportation and communication, these two gentlemen are from trade hotel side, the growth was 7.7 the previous year to 3.6. There was a huge drop in that. Now, we also have information that the discretionary consumption and services, the contraction there is even more than from investment and other industrial activity. So even before the lockdown, there was a drop in these areas of growth. Now, the lockdown has virtually, rendered them non-contributor to the economic growth, and therefore we are looking at a negative growth for the year FY 2021. Now, my only this thing is that how are we going to kickstart? See, the habits of people to come out and consume these services is going to be gradual, thanks to the health scare, as well as money people would like to save, not like to spend at this point in time. These two factors will certainly drive down demand, even if everything is open totally. But we need to see in this interregnum, how are we going to handle the problems of these sectors, and what steps are required to be done to make them come back without. There are people talking of 20% of the retail sector will be dead by the time normalcy returns. A similar thing may look at the scare in the face of the hotels and restaurant industry as well. So I am worried as to how we are going to make these sectors, various sectors, which have really gone into a problem on account of the lockdown, are able to come back on their feet. That's going to be a huge task. It's not only the supply side, which is being done by the government, very good steps have been taken, but on the demand side, how are we going to ensure, or in the interregnum, how are we going to support this sector without them dying out, is something we need to look at it. If you take the view that some of the inefficient entities in these sectors will in any case have to die, and therefore new ones will spring up, well, that's a good argument in economics. But considering the situation in the country at this point in time, I'm not sure that's a very, very valid and reasonable argument.
Yeah. Some of those are scary figures actually, and I should go around and get a view on that, Mr. Rajagopalan. 30% of retailers may not survive after this. Do you see maybe some silver lining with all of this pent-up demand that people are talking about, that initially at least there will be a requirement for basic non-essentials that people will have to go out and get?
Yeah, I think the reason why people are saying they'll not exist is not because there is no demand available at all. There is going to be some demand. It may still be at about 70% or 60% of what it used to be, but it's still demand. The big thing is, how do they really start? Because they're completely drained of cash. Now, the only way they can restart is if they've got some line of credit available. Most retailers do not have a line of credit. Some retailers have a line of credit which has got completely exhausted because they've been servicing fixed costs over this last 3 months, and there has been zero income. So now with zero income, fixed cost done what it's done, and they've been actually borrowing to try and pay off salaries and rentals during this period. How do they really start? Now there are suppliers breathing down their necks to try and get their money, rightfully so, because suppliers, if they don't get money, they can't manufacture. So it's a cycle that we'll need to kind of grease, and grease in this is money, and that needs to come in. The second part is about the fact that there is some amount of demand. It may not be really as big as it used to be, but retailers will have to learn. I believe that retailers are resilient when it comes to handling a slight fluctuation in demand. This is slightly more, but I still hope that they would be resilient. The big thing is money in their hands.
So what about the announcements that the government has made? They have eased lines of credit. Now MSMEs have been redefined. Will there be some relief coming in from there? Let me take that question to Mr. Katriar. In fact, the government has announced a slew of measures, and that actually is supposed to kick in from now. The biggest I would say stimulus measure is to unlock, right?
Yes. But as Mr. Rajagopalan was saying, let's understand a few very simple facts. Due to this complete lockdown, I'm sorry, there is no cash left with anyone. Nobody is sitting with any kind of resource to either take care of their needs of the past or take care of the fresh infusion required now. You need to buy new inventory. If I talk about restaurants, most of our stuff is perishable. We need to invest into new equipments and other things to comply with the new hygiene norms. Where does that money come from? And large part of the failures that we are talking about will also be because people are not left with enough liquidity to support their businesses. That's why they will shut down. Now, going forward as well, please understand with the subdued demand, there will be a huge pressure to fund cash losses on each of these retailers. And how does that happen? I think one of the very important aspects that everybody is missing is that only way to survive in the post-pandemic time is to bring down the cost, and that will not happen unilaterally only by the operators. Every stakeholder in the ecosystem needs to come together, talk to each other, sit with each other to arrive at a situation where the business survives. If business doesn't survive, no stakeholder, whether you are a landlord or an aggregator or whoever you are, will ever survive. And that is an important risk, that point that we have been talking about, emphasizing on. If we don't do all these things simultaneously, and last but not the least, I think other than liquidity, another support that the government can bring in is vis-a-vis certain policy changes, which will help us. If I give you an example of F&B, there is no input tax credit available on the GST. Now, we are the only industry singled out for this. And this means that my operating expenses on stuff like rentals and all go up by 18%. Now, when we are talking about saving every cost, a single change in policy can bring that effect in here. So, in a nutshell, unless every stakeholder in the ecosystem comes in together to save the sector.
Yeah, but I must ask you, Mr. Katriar, I must ask you, yes, but I must ask you, in obviously you have to keep the cost low to keep the business running. What does this mean in terms of the number of people who are hired and job losses? Because that's now a very important factor to watch out for. Have we already seen the worst of the job losses through the 70 odd days of lockdown, or will those deepen? What is the scenario in your industry?
It will deepen further. Unfortunate truth, but I cannot sugarcoat it at all. If there is no rozgar, karobar, there is no rozgar. As simple as that. If business volumes are going to be down, there will be job losses. And understand, we are the second largest employers of human capital in India after agriculture. 7.3 million people work directly. A 30% job loss means over 2 million people being rendered jobless. And that's a very optimistic scenario I'm talking about. So while we tried very hard to manage to keep everybody afloat, but the harsh reality is people are losing jobs. And as things progress, more people will be losing their jobs over next few months, if I may say.
Mr. Rajagopalan, you want to come in on that? Do you see deepening job losses across the retail sector?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. In the month of March and April, many of the people who were working with retail.
To what extent? To what extent, though?
My estimate only for retail, and when I say retail, I'm talking about all kinds of retail, right? And there have always been questions about how many people do you really represent, right? I say it's 46 million people, because retail represents a specter of categories there, and all of them are into retail, including Anurag's business, which is restaurant business. So our estimate is we've already lost about 3 million people. We could be losing 3 million jobs. We could end up doing about 6 to 7 million. It might be much more if there is no stimulus of any kind available to try and get some money into the hands of people to get that done. It is really serious. And let's not forget, a big chunk of the employees have already gone back. They got their money in March, they got their money in April, but many of them were migrants. They have gone back home. So that is a natural attrition that's also happened. So it's not a very simple situation. On the one hand, we need to open, and we do not have these 30% migrants who were part of the business, in the businesses. On the other hand, some of the locals are not coming back into the business. And and the retailers have been servicing the salaries of these people in the month of March and in the month of April, because the law stated that we have to pay them money and we have to pay them full money. That's something that's really worrisome, because had the retailers had the choice to pay enough money for sustenance of employees but not necessarily paid the entire amount of money, there could possibly have been some more money in the hands of businessmen to take care of the future employees coming in and to ensure that he is there.
Well,
that's not so that's become a vicious cycle also.
Well, I mean, a lot of back and forth happened on that law, but at the end of the day, if it sustained more families, that's also a positive side of it. I just want to get Mr. Gopalan's view on this very specific part of the puzzle as we move into recovery mode, which is labor. Migrant labor coming back. Now you've had members in the government saying that we will even bring them back by train if we need to. A lot of state government representatives that I've spoken to say that now this gives us more jobs for our locals, which we always wanted. Do you see a bit of struggle on that sense?
We see a lot of struggle on that sense. Those migrant laborers who have already gone back to their state. Now, I think they will spend their time until the festival season is over, and then only they will be in a position to make a move back to the metros. Now, having gone there after a lot of trouble, I think I feel that they will go and rest, take some time, assess situation, see whether there is any life available for them back in the villages, and then decide the next course of action, which I think will go on until the festive season is over. And there are governments which are trying to, UP government is trying to see how they can be absorbed in profitable occupations within the state itself. So my guess is that even if they come back, I expect some percentage of the people not turning up in the immediate future. So you will have some shortage of people for operating all these enterprises. Now, having said that, there are state governments who are taking proactive steps also to attract the migrant labor back. So until they come back, until people get convinced, they will not come back. And the issue of ration cards being made transferable across all states, and states trying to do registration of migrant labor so that there is some amount of social security which could be provided to them. These are the right steps in the right direction to attract the migrant labor back to the places where they were earlier working. If the success of these steps will determine how soon the migrants will come back.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to wait and see. We're just at the beginning, the very, very beginning of Unlock 1.0, and regular, viewers of this program will see how we've taken you through every phase of the lockdown, but we're going to do the very same in every phase of the Unlock mission, because that really is the true test. I want to thank all of you for joining us on the first big story this evening.